Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is John Miles, and I am a senior consultant at Admissionado. A little bit of background about me before I get into our topic for today. I graduated from Fuqua, so from Duke University's MBA program, and I was a daytime student. And during the program, I focused on entrepreneurship and also did a certificate in health sector management. And kind of apt for today, given that I came from 8 years in finance. So I was definitely someone who was using the MBA to do something different. And before we get into really what we're calling a tale of three applicants, where we're going to present three different actual applicants that we worked with in their different strategies and the way we sort of got them through the process. And these are backgrounds that, of course, some of you will definitely be able to relate to. So I'm not only will I be specific with them, but I will get into sort of how to think about the general principles when you're coming from a nonprofit sector or finance background. In addition, just to note, and some of you may know this, GMAT Club is running a giveaway, so where you can win free GMAT Club tests. So be sure to enter the competition. Just be sure to watch the video, like the video, and post a comment, and you'll be able to check the link in the description. And then at the end of this, I'm going to take questions. And anything I don't cover, I'm always happy to cover, after I'm done. So again, thank you for your time. And I'm going to jump in right now and just have some water, and then we'll get going. I just want to get a little more comfortable. So here we go. Bear with me. I'm just going to bring up the presentation. Okay, 1 second. Just going to share my screen. Okay. So here we are. And again, we are going to walk through three different profiles of three different applicants and give you a sense of their background and basically how they ended up getting into the programs. And you'll see that each of them had some strengths, some weaknesses, but in the overall composite, it was how they ultimately packaged themselves and branded themselves, which won out. So let's start. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over our three heroes, give a sense of what they did, what they were doing well before MBA, what they really were weak on, how we basically then took those strengths and weaknesses and packaged them correctly, emphasizing their strengths and really not acknowledging weaknesses, but also looking at weaknesses as places of growth through an MBA program. And then what I'll do is I'll open it up for Q&A at the end. So let's look at the folks that we've worked with and what we've learned from them. So let's meet them. The first one is Alex. So Alex is your typical finance guy. I was a typical finance guy, white male, spent 8 years at an investment bank. Alex is very similar. Ajith is our infotech and IT guy. So Ajith is coming from India, and again fills is very common profile we see and admissions committees see, and we'll sift through to sort of find out how they differentiate among the IT or engineering applicants. And the last one is Dina. And yes, Dina was a chicken farmer and a couple of other interesting things which have nothing to do with farming. So when you look at these three folks here, what we want you to think about is, you may not match one of them specifically. You may in some pieces when we get into their education background, their GMAT score. But I want you to start thinking now of how we viewed them kind of, holistically and assess them accordingly. So let's start with Alex. So Alex was, again, a finance guy from New York. Now, his undergraduate degree was not from, it was from a good school, but it wasn't from one that was, extremely highly ranked in some of the more common rankings, both national and international. So that was the University of Iowa. Now, we didn't know necessarily at the time what he specifically focused on at Iowa. Remember, some schools that may not be quote unquote top tier may actually be known for specific things. So one of the things I want you all to think about too is if you go to a school that may not have been, may not be in the admissions committee's eyes so well known, just remember that there's maybe you went for the writing program or you went for the engineering program, and that is actually highly ranked. So that's just something to keep in mind. Alex did spend 2 years right after Iowa in finance working at Morgan Stanley. So great company, big company, a lot of training experience. That's great. But it is, as many of you are thinking, okay, this is typical. A lot of us have this. So how do I differentiate myself? Well, let's continue. He took the jump to private equity after only 2 years. Now, typically, for those of you who don't know, the private equity jump is one that you often will make really after business school. So he obviously was doing great work at Morgan Stanley to get that look. That's something that we knew, okay, we've got to highlight that. Again, a lot of you may say, well, wait, I only have 2 years or 3 years of work experience. Well, guess what? It's quality really over quantity. And your job is really to articulate to the admissions committees that, yeah, I only worked for 3 years, but look what I did. That was Alex's case. So again, look where he is right now. Decent school, but really decent work experience. Now, on the extracurriculars, it wasn't like he did 6 things. He ended up having an interesting run-in with a homeless person, and that homeless person was distributing magazines. Some of you may know this, but in the U.S., there's basically a magazine that homeless people distribute amongst themselves. And he was curious, so he inquired about it. And long story short, he ended up joining the board of that nonprofit. Again, one role, very senior leadership role in a extracurricular capacity. And lastly, he had a little bit of an international background. Now, some of you will have much more than he had, so that's great. But he did live in France for a bit as a child. So that was something we kind of honed in on and wanted to kind of extrapolate from. In the end, Alex did get into Stanford and Wharton, as did his girlfriend. So let's take a look at the strategy and sort of how we packaged his strengths and weaknesses. So in terms of strengths, as I said, great work experience. He had a little bit of that multicultural exposure. Many of you, and I've seen this, have much, much more than Alex did, which is great. And I would highly emphasize not only telling those stories, but the key thing is telling them how it's going to be beneficial to an MBA cohort or an MBA section. Alex also came in as a very good writer. The finance part was a little bit deceiving. We were surprised. He wrote very good initial drafts, and it was a good springboard and launch pad. The other thing that we were impressed about was, to even add further strength to that private equity jump from 2 years at Morgan Stanley. Well, he was able to get a robust letter from the chairman of his PE firm. Now, this was not one of those glossed over general letters. This was actually very substantive. And, for some of you who sometimes ask, well, is it better to get someone who is higher up versus, seniority? It's the ideal combination is seniority and someone who can really talk about projects and compare you to peers or colleagues. But ultimately, again, this is a quality over quantity or stature argument. So you do want to get someone, and often it's not going to be the chairman of the firm unless you really have had direct access to him or her. Now, weaknesses, as I said, like me, white male coming from finance. His grades, so GPA and whatnot at Iowa, really weren't that stellar. I think his big break was when he was able to secure that Morgan Stanley job. And I think, again, like we know in life, everyone, if you have an opportunity and you're given it, it's what you do with it. And Alex was able to turn sort of a mediocre academic experience at Iowa into a very strong professional experience. And what did we know we had to do? Focus on the professional, which is really the core piece that they're looking for in your resume and in your essay stories. Lastly, he had a relatively low GMAT. As an aside, I had a 610 GMAT. And I took it 3 times, and my other 2 scores were below that. But what I did was I don't test well, and I came clean in my optional essay, and I gave them examples of how I've basically bombed every standardized test I've taken. But in terms of strategy now, this was the key thing. We thought, okay, not only, he's not just finance person. I mean, this is someone that, yeah, he's a finance person, but why hide it, right? A lot of you will say, well, everyone's going to say, everyone's coming from consulting or coming from a nonprofit or whatnot. You've got to work with what you have and create a strategy that is compelling, that's feasible, and that is going to give an admissions committee confidence that you're going to be able to secure that internship and secure that job. He also wrote his essays, believe it or not, really not about the professional stuff. I mean, he did when he had to do the goals essay, of course, but he ended up writing mostly about his extracurricular work and volunteer experience. So again, with this is the most important thing. No matter what background you have, everyone, you can't change that. What you have to do is work with it and tweak it into a way, most importantly, connecting that background to your future goals. Now, another thing I'd say is if you think about an admissions committee in terms of strategy with someone like Alex, we don't want them to roll their eyes as if to say, oh, here comes another person. We want them to say, wow, we want to meet this person. Let's get him in for an interview. Now, the way you do that is you have to create emotion. It's like when we buy products, we are drawn to something for a reason. There's a resonant emotive effect. And the same thing with applications. You guys, we're people. We're not just text on this online submission or lost in a PDF. We are people, and we have to kind of bring out the personality. You guys have to try to do that as best as you can. In the end, Alex, was able to secure this mostly by highlighting his strengths, really honing in on them, and then in the application, not so much stressing finance, because that's what his immediate label was, but stressing sort of the interesting things he did that complemented that. Now, the key thing, of course, remember, this is a Master's of Business Administration. People sometimes forget that it's business school. So if you're, if all else is lost here, the number one thing that often is the reason for rejection from an MBA program is unclear goals. So for example, I applied second round to 4 schools. My first attempt, I was rejected from all except a wait list for about 9 months. And if you read my essays, I basically said I wanted to go from 8 years at Goldman Sachs to social impact. I talked about Muhammad Yunus and Grameen Bank and healthcare opportunities. I had never worked in healthcare. I had never worked in nonprofit except for volunteering. So you see why I got rejected. I 8 years in finance. There's no way I can shake that, and I try to, and it doesn't work. So if anyone's an example, it's in terms of how the reason Alex got in because he didn't do that. I didn't get in because I did the opposite of what I'm telling you today. The key thing, and I'll say it again, is you can't make really drastic jumps. So if it's IT, when we're going to get into this later, think of how with Ajith, think about how you can parlay what you've done in IT and that domain experience or that functional experience into something that makes sense, but not nonprofit. Now with banking and financial tech and fintech, you can definitely do that. And I'm seeing more and more people do that, and it works well. But things like going from being a professional athlete to something, those are big jumps. And some of you may have military or Olympic backgrounds, a lot of leadership there, but you have to be careful with not creating stories that really don't have a path and a predictable path and a path that gives admissions committees confidence. And really what happens is you might say, well, can I change careers? I want to go back and try something new. A lot of people, of course, go to MBA to do that. You surely can, but you have to find bits and pieces in order to create that recipe, that post-MBA recipe, if you will. You've got to find little ingredients here and there that are going to give an admissions committee confidence that you can ultimately, create and envision and create that vision that you see a program helping you get to. Now let's talk about applicant 2. This is Ajith, and I kind of alluded to him at the end here as kind of a foreshadowing of the traditional IT background. So jumping into Ajith, this was interesting because he had graduated actually from the University of Mumbai, and for those of you who are listening, he didn't go to IIT, and he did though complement his education experience with a great 2 years at TCS at Tata, which is a very, very, if you're going to start at any company out of university, that's going to give you sort of like a Morgan Stanley, just that broad exposure, or a McKinsey, and kind of our feeder schools, so feeder companies to MBA programs, then this is a good one. But then he leaves and he goes to a startup. And you're thinking, well, okay, how's he going to position all this? They're going to wonder, well, why did you leave after 2 years? That could be a red flag, right? Well, let's start thinking ahead. Let's start thinking about, what about entrepreneurship? What about risk taking? What about taking ownership of your career and going for something? And maybe then saying, I went for something and now I want to do that as my post-MBA goal. You see how it starts to work is there's a reason he left, and it better be a good one. And if he doesn't convey why he left, then that's going to hurt him. Luckily, Ajith conveyed a very, very good one. And in addition, he had very, very strong extracurriculars all around the arts, most notably dancing and some acting work, but mostly dancing. And he wrote about that. Now, as a reapplicant, it's very, very challenging. It's really, you're in the hardest position. You have to really convey how you've improved both professionally and personally, and improved as a candidate to get in. Getting rejected from 8 schools, that's a daunting thing to go into a new cycle with. But look, he did get into Duke, Haas, and a few others, and particularly Haas. What they really liked about him was the entrepreneurial and startup jump that he made from a very established, secure position at TCS. Let's look at how he did this. So Ajith really came in with a number of strengths. The first one I'm actually going to point out was his personality. On paper, he might have come across as someone who was maybe more reserved in his work and not as interactive. But then what we tried to do is say, look, you dance, you act, like you've got to convey this. So he was very outgoing. We knew that if he could get an interview, he was going to be in great shape. He also, as I said before, the combination of entrepreneurial work experience at the SEO startup combined with TCS was excellent. I mean, people say, well, I've left companies in 6 years. I've joined 3 different companies. Sometimes, guys, that's out of your control. There's structural shifts in the market. Businesses are closed. So I wouldn't be too concerned with the number of jobs you've had. Now, if you're laid off from each of them for performance reasons, that's different. But there's so many things out of your control that on your resumes may seem like you've been hopping around. But just remember, that's a lot of that is out of your control. So you, again, work with what you have and tell that best story. Weaknesses for Ajith. He was the typical IT person coming from India. He was a reapplicant who had applied to 8 schools. So he had to be very, very careful with choosing the strategy around which schools he did reapply to. And then also, as an admissions committee, they're probably thinking, wait, if he's this good technically, why didn't he get into IIT, and what happened there? So we knew that ultimately it would be bringing this person alive that went way beyond TCS and way beyond the SEO piece. The only thing that we focused on there was combining the beauty and really the power of working at a very established company for training and experience purposes, and then going and pursuing something more entrepreneurial and conveying that in the essays. Overall, what's interesting about Ajith is he did end up working at Google, which I found quite interesting. Now, for those of you who know how Google many ways Google picks people, but one of them is really based around personality and how you'll excel around different types of people. You better believe his acting and performing arts background probably has an effect when he interviews or when he's working in a collaborative environment with sort of quote unquote, side actors or colleagues. So he's had that improvisational skill, which I'm sure Google liked. He also tweaked the essays to not focus on really the work. Again, similar to Alex, he focused a lot on his extracurriculars, but he kind of revealed leadership stories from those. The #1 trait, and it's not just Harvard, but leadership is really the trait they're looking for in many ways. And you can show leadership though in so many different ways. That could be military and special forces, and that can be captaining an Olympic volleyball team. There are many ways to do it, and it can be in the arts. We also looked at his prior application. Really, again, the #1 mistake I made, gang, when I applied first year and was rejected was totally trying to throw like, oh yeah, I'm not a finance guy, I'm gonna go do this, accept me. He did that in his first round of applications. He really didn't tie together his post-MBA goals with what he had done. What we also looked at was, how do we handle this IIT thing? And we found other ways to show that he was kind of crafty in the way he approached business. And you can guess where he had the opportunity to do that. That was really at the startup. I don't think for sure for TCS, he really would have been able to pitch it that way. So we thought, okay, what about joining a startup? Okay, it shows you can take risk. It shows that you're willing to, and you're confident. And you better have a good reason for joining the startup because of the unpredictable nature of them. But what we did was we found great projects within that work that showed that, wow, he has the potential to be an impactful business person, not an impactful engineer, not an impactful IT person. Those only enhance his skills as a business person, and we'll get into how that can be done. So here's the little bit of a break, and I'm going to kind of talk about this general guide to career changing, and think about this beyond IT as well. These are this is specific to IT, but this can apply across the whole spectrum. So again, when you have specific expertise or you have something that is more operational in work, maybe you're doing treasury swap accounting for Morgan Stanley. You're not on the main trading desk. Maybe you're doing, you're a radiation lab technician at a major hospital. Start to think about the knowledge you have. And then you think about, well, where's that knowledge needed? Where after MBA? So for example, IT can be a path into any number of things: marketing, consulting, product development, and even entrepreneurship. And I'll step back and be more general here. So it's not just focused on IT, but what Ajith kind of did was he basically said, look, I have consulting experience, I have TCS and startup experience. I kind of know that product management, product development is really a blend of art and science. I've had both of those. This is what I want to do. And that worked out well. That worked out much better the second time around. He didn't do that this first time. consulting can kind of sometimes be the easy way out for some of you, and you'll say, well, everyone's saying consulting. Again, you have to, if you can make the good story for it in a compelling case, it's like creating a legal case. You're building evidence for something, and you want the admissions committee to look at that evidence and be comfortable and say, yes, that is feasible. It has some vision. It has some boldness to it, but with our help at Kellogg or Haas or MIT, he or she is going to do this. So again, don't think that you're trapped. There are so many things where, I mean, fintech is a great example. Insurance, if you look at insurance technology startups right now, they're all hiring ex-people who know insurance, who know nothing about technology. They need that domain experience and the relationships that come with it. So lastly, let's look at Dina. Dina, yes, this is the hard to believe one. Dina is, I mean, really all over the map to start. From an admissions committee standpoint, we've got a reporter, journalistic background. We've got a chicken farmer. By the way, Dina is currently applying, so this is kind of where we don't have sort of the takeaways yet. But a Nevada-based organic chicken farmer. So let's start to think about what's going on in the farming industry. Is there anything that Dina wants to do, you know, after that might be beneficial or additive value add to farming industries? She is a Caucasian woman, recently converted to Islam, and she did attend Emory. So great school, but again, not one that is going to be in the top 5 or top 10 rankings necessarily. And of course, any resemblance to Ivanka Trump is entirely coincidental, gang. We have to lighten this up in places, of course. So strengths and weaknesses for Dina. I mean, the one word we saw was, okay, whoa, what are we gonna do here? But totally interesting, and we can work with this. Let's figure out how. So good work experience. I think the thing that we saw the most was not so much her project work amongst team per se, but more her sort of taking initiative. She was a bit of a self-starter. You can kind of sense that. Someone who's not afraid to jump from journalism to organic chicken farming is probably someone that has a bit of a filter on the fear or the anxiety around new things. So that's a leadership quality. I mean, someone who's able to sort of take control of their own path, which she did. She was well-traveled, well-cultured, well-read, and also another similar to Ajit, if we could get in an interview session, we knew it could go very well. Now, as a career changer, a lot of you may be doing this. Some of you may be doing non-traditional jobs where you're not working behind a cube or whatnot, or on planes, and you're doing sort of, you know, could be Peace Corps, could be things like that, volunteer work, Red Cross, we see a lot. You know, again, think about what you're doing in that role, how that applies to your potential business person impact, because that's what they're going to be looking for. It's not so much the what you're doing, it's sort of the how and the different stories within the context of what. Dina had low test scores. Again, Emory, great school, but not one that was, you know, one that's really going to jump out on the page, on the resume. And our biggest challenge, as you can see, was how are we going to take this kind of convoluted story of journalism, living in Nevada, organic chicken farming, to something that is going to be compelling and convincing to an admissions committee. So we sort of said, let's not differentiate her too much, meaning if we act like she's totally off the range, literally, it's not going to work out well. So we thought, where can she take her skills? And the key one that we thought, and a lot of you are going to come to this, and it's totally fine. Just make those connections between your past and, in this case, consulting. Think about all the organic trends, everything that's going on with food, and of course the transparency with which purchasers and buyers and customers like us now have. We're demanding more, so we thought, wow, Dean, why don't you try to take your knowledge and what you've done literally on the farm and be able to bring that to a company that probably doesn't have people necessarily who, they may have degrees in agriculture or things like that, but for someone that's actually been there in the processing process and blah, blah, that's perfect for consulting. Now, the other challenge we had, and we had to figure out, was, is she going to change again? You know, is she going to pull one of her, oh, I'm going to go explore something new? So we had to get them confident that she really meant this was what she wanted to do now. Having done A, B, C, and D, I finally realized I need to do this, and don't worry, I'm not going to move to Alaska and do something different, or Norway and do salmon farming. So we got her on that, which worked well. So in general, as we get to the end here, folks, let's just step back here and think about don't on the surface assume that you don't have something that's sellable, that you, just because you worked in a niche area or you have jumped around, you can't tie that into a nice thread of a story. You have very limited time to make an impression to admissions committees. So if you end up, when you end up applying, you're so focused on, well, I sound like this person, these 3 examples will give you a good idea that, yes, I mean, these 3 people sound like many people that may be listening or may be applying. And it's all about stepping back, creating a strategy, thinking about what you've done before you even put pen or start typing pen to paper. You have to step back and figure out what are your greatest stories and what about your past can be combined with an MBA to convince an admissions committee that you can achieve those, both the short-term and a long-term goal. Long-term goal, of course, being more built upon a foundation of your short-term. And lastly, I don't want you to forget, this is business school. It's not just about achievements and awards and dean's list and what % you were in your class. Listen, everyone applying to MBA works hard. They have decent grades. They've won awards. They've won medals and trophies. Who cares? What they care about is how are you going to kind of parlay all that success into a successful business person, whether that's starting a company, contributing to a company, growing a company, whatever it may be, redoing their operations. That's what they're looking for. It's not just about achievements. Everyone has achievements who are applying to top programs. Now, looking at summary here, let's just put it all together. Be who you are. You can't change that past. You have to go with what you've got and work with it as best you can and bring out the stories. Some of you often I will speak to, and 3 weeks into the process will say, well, I didn't think that was important. I didn't really think I needed to tell you that. Get it all out on paper. Just start writing who you are. It's a very introspective, self-reflective exercise applying to business school. And it's very important that you really step back and sort of figure out, who am I? What do I want? What matters to me? That's going to make for much more salient and compelling essays. Remember, there's a fine line here. You don't want to come across like with Dina as saying, oh, I'm really far out and atypical. Choose me, 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 me. You also got to realize that can backfire. So you want to ultimately find this sweet spot where it's basically saying, yeah, I'm atypical and I've done this, but I can do business well. And with your help, I'm going to really get to show that in whatever work you decide you put in your goals. But again, if you're more typical, just be conscious of that. You can't change that. Be conscious of it, work with it, and again, you can find atypical stories within typical work. That's the key thing here. And again, in terms of weaknesses in the argument, again, the strengths versus weaknesses, you totally want to focus on your strengths. But when you do address your weaknesses, do those in a very short and succinct way. You don't want to be writing optional essays that go on and on and on about why your GPA is this or that, or your GMAT. For example, in my case, I had a 510, a 580, and a 610 were my 3 attempts. I also bombed my MCAT when I almost went to medical school, and I bombed my SAT here in the US. So I kind of put my hands up and it worked. I was honest, but I can write well, and I was able to, not the first time around, the second time around. Remember, don't make those jumps, and be careful if you're coming from one background. Be careful not to really, make too big of a jumps. If you are a career changer, you can do it, but you have to do it in a way that's not as drastic as me going from finance to, Grameen Bank discussions. So that's it for now. I am going to now take questions and go out of the slide presentation. And also just say to you all, if you ever are interested in doing a free consultation with me through Admissionado, there's a hyperlink, easy to access on our website, admissionado.com, and I'd be happy to do a consultation with you. So thank you very much. And I'm going to now pop out and go live so you can see me again. One sec. Okay. Hello, I'm back. And I'm going to have some water. Okay. So let's dive into some questions. Okay, so I'm just looking here. Let's see, we've got a bunch coming in. Okay, this one I'm going to jump in right away. Great question. What would my advice be, or our advice be, for reapplicants, especially with the additional essay? Okay, so this is probably, if you notice, a lot of programs now, they'll say if you're reapplying, you don't have to do the other essays. Okay, there's a reason for that. They want all the weight on the reapplicant essay. So the key things to think about in terms of how you structure this. The first are, it's not just work improvements. You want to look all the way back to when that last cycle ended, and you want to look at both personal growth. So that could be extracurriculars, things you've done. You know, some people will hurry and go do something just for the heck of it to make it look like. Do something that has some duration to it, not something you did in July and you say you did it. Do something that maybe you started to do and you're still doing, or you still want to do. Also, when you think about your growth at the company, there are two pieces of this. You want to show maybe increased responsibility. It could be a promotion. It could be that you're leading a team or you're managing junior folks. That's one. Another one would be international assignments. Maybe you were taken out of your comfort zone of the home office and sent on an assignment somewhere. So again, the multicultural work and working with people from different countries. The other one to think about is they want to see that you now have maybe increased clarity around your goals. One of the 4 key elements of applying to admissions committees are looking for is clarity of purpose. And if you were if you were kind of unclear about your goals in the first attempt at applying, you need to nail that this time. You really need to nail that. I've thought about it. I don't want to do this. I want to do this, and here's why. Now, you do want to be careful if you are changing strategy in the reapplicant or your goals. You better have a good reason why you're changing that. And sometimes it is just as bad. It's just it's simple as, look, I didn't connect my past experiences to my future goals last year, but now I've thought about it more. So again, they want to show that you've reflected personally and professionally. But great question. Let's see here. So another reapplicant question. So here's a question. Is it a good thing to focus on something that you didn't the last time, which is not necessarily in the last year? Yeah, you know, it's funny that the intuition behind the prompt or the essay is to only focus, you know, on what you did, you know, since applying. But what I'd say is, if you have something that you just, again, it's all part of that self-reflection. If you reflected on it and realized, you know what, I didn't think this was relevant, but maybe now it's relevant to your goals. That even would be even more compelling. But in general, yes, it's okay to do that. I wouldn't reach back to, you know, 6 years ago. I would kind of keep it recent, unless it's something that you decided maybe was a personal thing that you just didn't feel comfortable or writing about, and now you want to share it. You know, there are tons of stories where people have personal events that they finally decide to open up about, and that may come in the second round attempt. Okay, great. Okay, so here's a great question. So for those of you on LinkedIn, LinkedIn can be a great source. This is about, you know, what are some things, how do I identify goals if you're unsure of what you want to do? I mean, we all kind of want to go to MBA sometimes and explore. That's important, but you've got to figure out what you think you want to do, short-term and long-term. So what you can do with this is, I often recommend to clients, look at LinkedIn, look at paths that people have taken. Look at maybe someone who was doing nonprofit consulting now works at Acumen Fund or the Clinton or Gates Foundations. Go onto LinkedIn. It's so, you basically see right there, and then you can even say, oh, they went to Booth or they went to MIT. What companies recruit there? There's so much stuff on LinkedIn that can help. So it's a great question, and I would say if you're having trouble identifying goals, look at what other people are doing. So I'm going to take a couple more. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Good question. I mentioned that outgoing people did well at interviews. What about introverts? I also recommend you guys, if there's a TED Talk about introverts versus extroverts, you should watch it if you are introvert, and maybe find interviewing not your greatest strength. I doing this, you can probably tell I can, you know, interviews are sort of a strength. But here's what you do. I think part of an interview, it's a conversation. So if you are an introvert, think about just a conversation. It doesn't have to be overly enthusiastic, and it doesn't have to be, it has to be, you're reflecting. So if someone asks you a question, as an introvert, you may be, you don't want to be afraid to speak, of course, but you want to be, there has to be a level of trust that gets developed. Now that's hard to do with someone you first meet. But it's, if you twist it from selling yourself in the interview as an introvert and more about just talking about yourself and revealing yourself, in some ways that will help you, because extroverts, in terms of selling, can sometimes come across as almost, you know, almost harsh, almost too enthusiastic and almost aggressive. So I think you can use it to your advantage by, again, treating the interview as a conversation, just like you would with anyone else, except you're kind of answering more questions than you necessarily are asking them. So I would definitely check out the TED Talk. It's really great to see how ultimately we're all a mix of both, but especially in an interview setting, it can be quite helpful to be an introvert. Let's take one more here. I've done some reapplicant ones, so let's say. Let me just cover two quick things. So one on GPA, someone asked about what GPA to explain in your optional essay. So remember, some people can have really high GPAs in their major and then really low overall, and a reason for that. I started with a 2.5 out of 4.0 and I ended with a 3.3. All they care about is progression. I also was pre-med, you know, taking organic chemistry, things like that. So they were hard courses. But I would say in your optional essay, you know, reveal both. But you know, if you have a low GPA, come clean, but don't stress about it too much. You don't want to write 300 words about it. It's really, here's what happened. Here's the deal. I was overextended. I was sick. I had mono, whatever it may be. And then the last question, a great question. Let's see. Let's try to find someone that's a little different. So this is a good question. How do you address a less known undergraduate school on your resume? Okay, so so I went to Duke for undergrad and business school. So obviously it's a more well-known school than some more of a liberal arts school, although I looked at those. I was also an English major there. So I didn't do anything in business there. What I would say is it's a fine line. Business schools want to be looked at as the launch pad for your future. They don't necessarily want to be